BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Now, some of you know that every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer called Zodiac Monday, and on Wednesdays I added a segment about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday, and this week there is a double event, 2 episodes about Jack the Ripper. And there are a couple reasons for this, but the primary reason is that this is done in the tradition of Black Box Online Radio, where I follow true crime stories, and this is simply just what I have been reading about and learning about, and several people had left comments about a particular Jack the Ripper suspect named Michael Maybrick. He's a suspect that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and the second reason for this episode is that before I did the Jack the Ripper report for Ripper Wednesday, I used to just make suspect profile videos, and I had always wanted to do one on Michael Maybrick, and I found that with this story, almost every single discussion has to begin with one on his brother, James Maybrick, whom I have a suspect video about. James Maybrick, he was the victim of a crime called the iceberg poisoning, where his own wife was put on trial for his his murder. They called it a murder, although it's possible in all actuality that his wife was not responsible for it, and that it was just an accidental poisoning involving an overdose on arsenic. The question that we still have today is, did he overdose himself because he was taking arsenic as a form of medication, or did his wife actually give it to him because she wanted to murder him? And his wife was Florence Maybrick. And in the early 1990s, there was a documentary that was put out called The Diary of Jack the Ripper, which told the story of Michael Barrett, someone who claimed that he had come into the possession of a book that was written by Jack the Ripper, a diary, where someone detailed all of the reasons why he had committed the crimes in 1888, and it was even signed Jack the Ripper, and it was attributed to James Maybrick. Now, I've discussed that in his own suspect profile video, but James Maybrick had a brother named Michael, and a Ripperologist named Bruce Robinson went on to write a book called They All Love Jack, where he explores Michael Maybrick, James Maybrick's brother, as the Ripper. And this is one that goes so far beyond who was Jack the Ripper, because it ties into a bunch of Masonic theories, like from the Masons, and the secrets of the Masonic world. And it is one that involves ritualistic ideas, mythological ideas, legends. And Bruce Robinson said by his own admission that he spent 15 years writing his book, They All Love Jack. And Michael Maybrick was someone who was a rather famous celebrity at the time. And the name They All Love Jack comes from one of the songs that he would perform. He was a singer, composer, songwriter. He was actually rather famous in England at the during his lifetime. But then he would actually go on to become a local politician. He would first go to Jamaica and then the North America, and Bruce Robinson accuses him of murders in all of these locations, but he ends up settling in the Isle of Wight, and he goes on to become the mayor of a town on the Isle of Wight. And I'll share more about that throughout the duration of the episode. But for this one here, I would just like to remind you guys that you can hit the like button, subscribe, as well as visit some of the links in the description box, and one of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and that allows you to make a donation or a contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. Okay, so, was Michael Maybrick Jack the Ripper? Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who operated in 1888 in England, and the crimes went from August 31st to November 9th of that year. Whatever happened before or after that is anyone's guess. And actually, with Jack the Ripper, the confirmed crimes are still up for debate about who actually committed these murders. Now, I have to give some very honest statements about this. I looked into the story of James Maybrick as Jack the Ripper. I thought that it was a lie. I thought that it was just a completely made-up story. This guy named Michael Barrett, who was in the possession of Jack the Ripper's diary, I didn't believe him. I just thought that it was a concocted story because he was unemployed at the time, and he just made it up. Now, did his wife assist him in some way? Most likely. It's a falsified story. And then this guy named Bruce Robinson goes on to write a book called They All Love Jack, and saying, aha, wait a second, it wasn't James Maybrick, it was his brother, Michael, and I was very pessimistic about this particular suspect. But as you'll see, I'm going to be approaching this with an open mind, and it has to be divided into two ways. The first one is that was Michael Maybrick Jack the Ripper, and the second is, are all of these Masonic clues or something that have any value? Because I was also very pessimistic about this type of Masonic connection to the Whitechapel murders of 1888, because I was thinking, this is just going to be another wild and wacky conspiracy theory. And I even discussed this in my suspect profile video for Sir William Gull, where I point out, okay, this whole idea that Sir William Gull, a royal surgeon and royal physician, is murdering the women in a carriage, and then their bodies are placed outside, and I just thought that that was just a bunch of wild conspiratorial ramblings. But as far as the Masonic connections go, Bruce Robinson said that he began to investigate the crimes over a period of 15 years, and that there are certain things that stand out that are reminiscent of the Masonic legends. And this is something where I actually think there is credibility. And yes, I know some of you already want to respond, so I'll just get to the heart of the issue. This was discussed well before Bruce Robinson, and he borrows a lot of ideas from an individual named Stephen Knight, who wrote a book called The Final Solution. And he does give credit to Stephen Knight, particularly in a presentation that he did at the 5x15 Talk Forum. It's a 15-minute presentation on YouTube, hence the name. And at about the 9-minute mark, he gives full credit to Stephen Knight, saying all of these observations about how the Jack the Ripper crimes could have been Masonic rituals. Then they, that's where he was getting the ideas from. And he said that what he wanted to do was read the different Ripper books, and one of the books that he read was The Final Solution by Stephen Knight. And he said that this guy didn't make the stuff up. He didn't get it out of thin air. His ideas came from somewhere. He just didn't settle on the right suspect. It wasn't Sir William Gull and his carriage driver and Walter Sickert. It was Michael Maybrick. So then that's when I began to approach the subject in a different way. Number one, though, let's look at some of the claims of Bruce Robinson about his Jack the Ripper suspect, Michael Maybrick, a famous singer and brother of another Jack the Ripper suspect. Number one, he believes that the crimes that were committed against women in 1888 by the Ripper were ritualistic murders. And when I first heard this, I was like, okay, I'll hear you out, but again, I'm pessimistic. Number one, the women had their throats slashed, which was meant to represent silencing someone, which was done by the Masons. And at first I'm like, that is just an ordinary detail. Lots of people are murdered and have their throats cut. It doesn't immediately signify any piece of information. You're going to have to do a lot better than that. But the women who were murdered in the Jack the Ripper mystery, Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman and Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Kelly, were also attacked in different ways. Polly Nichols Annie Chapman, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly were all mutilated. Ripper was horribly inconsistent with his activities. Some women were mutilated more harshly than others. And one of the series that I've been following for the Jack the Ripper Report on Wednesdays is the Barlow and Watt documentary series. It's a 6-part documentary series, and I've been going through it, and they talk about the murder of Catherine Eddowes. After that crime took place, Catherine Eddowes was mutilated, her intestines were pulled out and thrown over the left shoulder, and also some things were stolen from the crime scene, as particularly organs, Catherine Eddowes' kidney most famously. And then somebody walked down the street and possibly, I repeat possibly, wrote a message on the wall that has been known as the Goulston Street Graffito, which said something to the effect of, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Now, that is not necessarily the exact text, because even the Barlow and Watt documentary series points out that the text was erased. I mean, it was erased because some people thought that the term or the name Jew would spark a riot. That's the story that I've heard in several different sources. It could have been said, "The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Something to that effect. It's called the Goulston Street Graffito. But Jews was misspelled Juews, to the best of our knowledge. Again, this is depending on whose recollection are we dealing with. And what they pointed out was something, again, from Stephen Knight, is that does not say the word Jew, Jews, referring to Jewish people. Now, there are 3 possibilities that I want to explore right now. Number 1, that refers to just Jewish people. Number 2, it refers to something Masonic. And number 3, that it wasn't even written by the killer, that it was just a graffito that was already on the wall, and the killer happened to walk by and leave some evidence behind, and then people simply thought that was Jack the Ripper. So I always have a little bit of skepticism, but this is where I had a big reversal in thinking about the Masons and how there could be some type of genuine Masonic connection. And when I first looked into this thing with, any type of Masonic conspiracy in the Jack the Ripper world, I thought it was going to be the NHB card. That's what I'm now calling it on Black Box Online Radio. Nonsense, hogwash, baloney. I was like, this is just a bunch of people who are looking into something and they're seeing what they want to see. It's getting more and more out of control. They simply can't accept that something terrible happened in 1888. But when you actually read some of this Masonic stuff, which I'll talk to you about right now, then you begin to think, is there any possibility that this could be true? And the first point is that Jews could actually refer to the Masonic story of Jubala, Jubilo, and Jubilum. And I want to read something from GrahamHancock.com, and it talks about the story of the 3 ruffians, the blood oaths for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degrees of Masonry. And this is a Masonic story of how King Solomon had an architect named Hiram Abif, and these 3 ruffians, Jubilo, Jubila, and Jubilum, wanted to know the secrets of Hiram Abif and the reason why he created a building the way that he did. And for trying to extract information out of Hiram Abif, they were punished. And from GrahamHancock.com, I would like to read the 3 punishments that were given to Jubila, Jubilo, and Jubilum. First, Jubila. Oh, that my throat had been cut across, my tongue torn out, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea, at the low water mark where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours. I had been an accessory to the death of so good a man as our Grand Master Hiram Abif. This is where things get weird, though. The second one, Jubilo. Oh, that my left breast had been torn open, and my heart and vitals taken from thence and thrown over my left shoulder, and carried into the valley of Jehoshaphat, there to become prey to the wild beasts of the field and the vultures of the air, ere I had conspired the death of so good a man as our Grand Master Hiram Abif. And, as I said previously, not only did Catherine Eddowes have her intestines pulled out and thrown over the left shoulder, that was also something that happened to Annie Chapman. And even when I read that the first time, I was already getting to part 2, and like, no, wait a second. Not all the Ripper victims had their intestines pulled out and thrown over the left shoulder. I mean, it's Annie Chapman and Catherine Eddowes. Liz Stride, the third victim, wasn't murdered. Mary Kelly, the final victim, did not have her intestines thrown over the left shoulder. If you ever look at the crime scene photo there, then the intestines are actually pulled out and placed on a nightstand table that was next to Mary Kelly's body. So we have the third one, though, the punishment of jubilum. Oh, that my body had been severed in two in the midst and divided in the north and the south, my bowels burnt to ash in the center, and the ashes scattered by the four winds, that there might not have had the least track or remembrance remain among men. Masons of so vile perjured a wretch as I am, ah, jubilo and jubilo. It was I that struck him harder than you both. It was I that gave him the fatal blow. It was I that killed him outright. So as you see that it's not only about revealing secrets, but also about a murderous plot. But I'm going to be very blunt with you guys. I'm going to be very frank. I was so much more concerned about how this Masonic story related to the Ripper case as opposed to what the Masons actually believe. And Bruce Robinson, by his own admission, only states that he doesn't hate Freemasons. It's just he wanted to investigate this and see that its relevance to the Jack the Ripper story. Okay, so I have to also discuss something in a very direct way, and that is that this sounds very similar to the murder of Mary Kelly, and Mary Kelly's heart was even removed from her body, and her organs were, well, she was mutilated very badly. I'll just leave it at that, but one of the famous details is that her heart was removed, and you can see how that could be tied into some type of ritualistic event later on, such as burning the heart to ash, so to speak. So it's insufficient to just say that the throat slashing is anything ritualistic, but actually reading those details, there are certain things that stand out, and there's certain things that I could follow in a very direct manner. I mean, the evidence is matching up with that particular story. And I also want to get into more of Bruce Robinson's observations about Michael Maybrick. And one of the videos that I had watched was a presentation that he had done at the Shakespeare and Company bookstore. That's the name of the YouTube channel, Shakespeare and Company Bookshop. Now, it's 53 minutes long, and the first 30 of it have absolutely nothing to do with Jack the Ripper. It's all talking about, firstly, the political situation in England, and then the political situation in 1888. And his book is 800 pages long with multiple appendices where they discuss, these types of ideas. It seems like a commentary on a lot of different events, which, to be honest, I don't follow the political situation in England. I wanted to know more about the Ripper case. And there's also the story of Michael Maybrick. Again, his brother was a Jack the Ripper suspect. And I'm going to once again be critical. When I was looking into this, I thought that, all right, think about the two sources that I've said, Stephen Knight and The Final Solution, and Michael Barrett and The Diary of Jack the Ripper. This guy has taken two Jack the Ripper stories, and he has just forged a link between them. Stephen Knight and Michael Barrett. And I was going through the comments section, firstly here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and then on a different video about Jack the Ripper, and I encountered one from Jay, who had been following this series, and Jay almost took the words out of my mouth directly, saying, this guy, Bruce Robinson, has just taken two Jack the Ripper stories and forged a link between them. And the two Ripper stories are the one from Stephen Knight and the one from Michael Barrett. Like, he literally took the words out of my mouth. And Jay did share some of the stuff in the comment section on Black Box Online Radio. However, I didn't recall that exact comment in the past. So, as you see, we were coming to somewhat of a similar conclusion that maybe even if this guy isn't making it up, I am not calling Bruce Robinson a fraud, not at all, but he is someone who has been heavily influenced by the work of other Ripperologists to the point where it's affected his judgment and his thinking. There was also a very good presentation that was done on the Art of Crime podcast. It must be available on the podcast circuit because it had just under 600 views at the time that I listened to it, but a very, very well researched presentation, and it was called Master Mason Michael Maybrick, Artists Accused of Being Jack the Ripper. one more time, the Art of Crime podcast. And the host of that one points out that Bruce Robinson doesn't simply state that Jack the Ripper was trying to commit these murders in the act of Freemasonry, trying to create Masonic rituals. Instead, he was also doing it because of James Maybrick's wife, Florence Maybrick, and that she had been destroying the family, so to speak, racking up a bunch of deaths. And in the theory involving James Maybrick, it's that he wanted to commit the murder of his wife, but only in the fantasy world. He wanted to act out the fantasy of killing his wife over and over again. And James Maybrick didn't actually want to murder his wife, because then it would be over. It was all about the anticipation. It was all about the power. It was all about just knowing that he had the ability to murder his wife, and he wanted to commit those actions over and over again by targeting different women, taking out his frustrations on his wife with other women. And then ultimately that led to the murder of Mary Kelly, who was murdered very viciously, and there was an F and an M that was written on the wall for Florence Maybrick. And you can see this in the crime scene photos, and this has been something that has been authenticated and examined prior to the revelation of the Diary of Jack the Ripper. Even in the photos that were printed in the 1970s, the F and M is present on the wall well before Michael Barrett ever came forward with the Diary of Jack the Ripper. There's actually about a 90-minute documentary on the Diary of Jack the Ripper here on YouTube. So then what happens, though, is the Art of Crime podcast openly calls out Bruce Robinson by saying, now that theory with James Maybrick's a little bit weird. I mean, you can kind of understand it. He hates his wife and he wants to act out the fantasy of killing her over and over again. But this whole element of a man hates his sister-in-law, and that's why these murders are being committed. I mean, his sister-in-law, that's why Michael Maybrick is committing these murders against women. I mean, that barely makes any sense at all. And then Bruce Robinson goes on to add an additional layer to his Jack the Ripper theory, and that is that the Diary of Jack the Ripper that I've been discussing is authentic. The one that Michael Barrett was talking about, the diary that he claimed to be in the possession of, it was authentic, and it was written by Michael Maybrick, and he intentionally falsified it. Well, not falsified, he intentionally created it to blame his brother James Maybrick for the murders. He wanted James Maybrick to become a Jack the Ripper suspect as a patsy. So his statement is mostly that Michael Maybrick was a pure psychopath, that anyone who would go on to commit the murders of Jack the Ripper's nature was a psychopath. And also it shows that Michael Maybrick had no loyalty, because as I was going through the presentations, another one is available on Catch News here on YouTube. It's called Serial Killers and God Complexes. Bruce Robinson talks about Jack the Ripper, and he even goes into how he thinks that Michael Maybrick hated the Masons. And he hates his brother, he hates his sister-in-law, he hates the Masons. He is just someone who is genuinely a psychopath and wants to torment people. But I was like, wait a second. I was very, very surprised about this, because this guy's acting out Masonic rituals when he's committing the murders, yet he hates the people who are believing in Masonic traditions. How does that all fit in and work together? I mean, that was one thing where I almost had like not a jaw-dropping moment, but like, hey, what? And that means that it was about the act of power, committing the crimes in a way where he would never be called out on it. He would never be arrested for it, and the case would never be brought to trial, because it would reveal the secrets of the Masons. If anybody were ever to actually investigate the crimes or to bring the truth to light, then the secrets of the Masons would be exposed, and it was purely done as a form of a game. Those are almost the exact words of Bruce Robinson, that Michael Maybrick was playing a sort of game with the Masons, and he knew that he wouldn't get caught. And here's an additional layer to fuel the conspiracy theory flames, and it is that the authorities knew very well who was committing the crimes. I mean, on on the one hand, he thinks that Jack the Ripper was a brilliant person who got away with this because it was calculated. On the other hand, the crimes were done in somewhat of a sloppy way, murdering women in the street, except for Mary Kelly, walking away, leaving their bloody bodies. So the police could have figured out very easily what had happened, and the authorities most likely did know who Jack the Ripper was, but they did not arrest Michael Maybrick for the previously mentioned reason that certain people in the police force, certain people in the entirety of law enforcement, even all the way to the top of the royal family, were involved with the Masons, and that it would reveal these types of secrets. And think about what we said. You have the story of Jubilo, Jubila, and Jubilam, who want the secrets of Hiram Abif, and if they don't get it, then they're going to kill him, and then they are killed, and their bodies are torn apart in their own ritualistic way. It seems like one of the rules of the Masons is you don't talk about the rules of the Masons. I think that sounds a little bit like Fight Club, but that's also an element that has been discussed here. I'm going to give you guys my very honest take on the subject. And that is that I don't see an ounce of credibility for Michael Maybrick being Jack the Ripper. And the reason is that, firstly, James Maybrick is a terrible Ripper suspect. And Michael Maybrick writing the Diary of Jack the Ripper, I think that the Diary of Jack the Ripper was an absolute forgery. I think it was a piece of fiction that was created either by Michael Barrett or his wife purely for profit. And what I think happened was Michael Barrett wanted to write a book about James Maybrick's murder called The Iceberg Poisoning, and he even talked about this in the mid-90s. He had researched the case, and he thought that he could do it without getting caught. Like, he knew about the certain consistencies with the Jack the Ripper timeline where he could create the forgery, and everything would match up in a way where people wouldn't be able to call out inconsistencies and inaccuracies. In short, he lied. So that means that I don't think Michael Maybrick, the brother, wrote the Diary of Jack the Ripper either. And I have, an episode on Michael Maybrick, and I've also have one on the Maybrick murder, which looks at how Florence Maybrick could have possibly murdered him. But she actually was spent 15 years in prison in England, and she was originally from America, so when she got out of prison, she returned to America, and she actually lived all the way to the 1940s, the World War II era. But I'm not even convinced that Florence Maybrick murdered her husband. He might have died, as I said, from an accidental poisoning. I definitely don't think it's an open and shut case. So then, I think that the honest response is that Michael Maybrick is a weak Jack the Ripper suspect. But the Masonic clues actually have a lot of merit. And some people think that I'm just dismissive. They're like, you don't like anybody. You don't like anybody's theories. No, correction, I don't like most people's theories, but when you actually look at these things involving the Masonic connection to Jack the Ripper, the more time that I spend following this case, the more sense it starts to make. And I'm not saying that Jack the Ripper was a Mason or that any of it's true. It could all be coincidental. I mean, when I first looked at this thing involving any deeper meaning in the Goulston Street graffiti, I was like, no, that word means Jews. The Jews, the men that will not be blamed for nothing. That means Jews. It's just spelled incorrectly, but that's what it's talking about. Jewish people. Let's not read any deeper into it. But, once I heard that story of the disemboweling executions of the victims, then it started to make a little bit of sense to me. And I just want to point out, though, that prior to the theory on the Jack the Ripper murders from Stephen Knight, which came out in the 1970s, in the 1950s and 60s, there was a very widely held belief that Jack the Ripper had a specific target. That target was Mary Kelly. And you can see this in the 1959 Jack the Ripper movie, is it called just that, Jack the Ripper? And also from the 1965 film, Sherlock Holmes and a Study in Terror. It's really just referred to as A Study in Terror. And it's all about how Jack the Ripper has one victim that he wants, and he's murdering other women trying to get to her. And even as I was watching these films, I'm like, no, wait a second. Okay, I understand that he wants to murder a specific woman, but then he finds out that she's not the woman he's looking for, so he murders her anyway. I guess just hating women, taking out frustrations on women. But, I mean, if you watch the 59 Ripper film, this guy's just approaching women, and they changed her name to Mary Clark for the movie. Not Mary Kelly, but Mary Clark. And he says, "Mary Clark, are you Mary Clark?" And she says, "No." And then he kills her anyway. It's like, well, she's not the specific target. And I was like, what a horribly impractical and unnecessary thing to do. But it could also be done in just someone who hated women and is targeting women for a rage-filled reason as opposed to simply a practical one. That could be something that did indeed happen, and that would be in complete contradiction to anything involving Masonic rituals or anything involving this calculated plan by Michael Maybrick. It's simply an alternative theory that's been put forward. But I will end with some challenge questions. Do you believe that Michael Maybrick was Jack the Ripper? Do you believe anything about how these Masonic connections are matching up with Jack the Ripper's activities? Do you believe that the Goulston Street graffiti was written by the Ripper? Part 2 question. What does the word Jews mean? The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. And that's all for me now. Feel free to tune in every Wednesday for the Jack the Ripper Report, also called Ripper Wednesday, here on this channel. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there. Until next time.